Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has finally revealed his victory plan. We've been talking about this for really quite a while, but until just yesterday, we thought it might mean something different than it does. But apparently, it has to do not with protecting people in Ukraine, but protecting trillions of dollars in assets.
These deposits are priceless. It is huge amounts of money. Huge. That is why we need to protect it. So if we are talking about a deal, that's what the Americans want, then let's do a deal. We are only for it. Let's do the deal.
Now, one could certainly say, well, that's just Zelensky reading the room and understanding that because Trump has been saying a lot of stuff about rare earth minerals here of late, that he's just trying to placate Trump. He's trying to talk his language. He's trying to butter him up, whatever, because that is a profound and stark change of direction from anything Zelensky has said in the past, that it's always been about protecting the people. And then he tried, well, actually, it's about protecting Europe. We're the vanguard. We're fighting for Europe. He tried that for many, many months. That didn't seem to get him anywhere. And so now then he seems to be changing, not to protect Ukraine, not to protect Europe, but well, it's to protect the trillions of dollars. He carried it a little bit further in this clip.
This is what I told President Trump when we were together. I told him, this is the victory plan. Why victory? Victory for all. We will protect those trillions. We will prevent Russia from mining the minerals which will later be used to produce technologies for the three countries of the axis of evil. The Americans helped the most, and therefore the Americans should earn the most. And in rebuilding Ukraine, they should have this priority, and they will. I would also like to talk about this with President Trump.
Victory plan for who? That is, I think we need to just camp on this for a second. Don't miss this. Don't gloss over this and say, well, he's just trying to placate Trump, because this is a revealing comment here. What he's talking about, he says a victory plan. Victory for who? Now, the word that came out of his mouth was victory for all, but he is talking about a victory for Trump. He is basically saying we need to go down this path here so that Trump can get a victory. And then he actually uses the phrase protecting the trillions. That's his focus right now. So what that tells you is, and I'm sorry for anybody who's pro-Ukraine who's watching this. This is not going to be pleasant to hear, but you need to, because this is the truth, and it is on display for anyone who's willing to see it. Zelensky is not interested in protecting the Ukrainian people. He is interested in protecting Volodymyr Zelensky. That is the harsh truth. And if we don't start from an understanding of that, then any kind of discussions or negotiations towards a ceasefire, end of war negotiations, any of those things are going to be built on the wrong foundation. We need to understand Zelensky is out for Zelensky, and he will literally do whatever it takes to be able to preserve his position. Because, and I know this for a fact, it's not even supposition, because you look at all the things he's done from the outset. He refused to make the slightest negotiation and declaration that there would be no NATO in Ukraine, even though it was self-evident before that there would never be NATO in Ukraine. Before the war started, all he had to have done was declare neutrality. Everything else would have stayed on the table. Everything else he wanted, with economic integration with the West, even bilateral military cooperation with Western nations, all that would have stayed on the table if only he had taken NATO off the table. Instead, he says, no, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to keep moving towards NATO membership. That predictably prompted war. He knew that. Don't miss this either. He knew it because Putin had very clearly told both Biden and Stoltenberg privately behind the scenes, directly, NATO into Ukraine equals war. We will come. We have their forces arrayed, etc. So Zelensky knew at that time that that's what it would mean. Then, of course, in all the different times, the Istanbul, the November 2022, after the disaster of 2023, and last June, every single time he had an opportunity to protect his people, to end the war, to seek a negotiated settlement on the best terms available. And some of those iterations back then were quite good comparatively to what they're going to end up with. He punted on every one of them. Now, this is the most egregious of all. Here we have Volodymyr Zelensky in the, well, you can't even say 11th hour. This is more like 11:59. Trump has come into office expressly on having a negotiated settlement. He has publicly had his envoy, Keith Kellogg, say that he has set a target date of 100 days from the date of inauguration. So we're already about a month into that days. He wants to end the war. And so there is no path to any kind of win or any kind of victory. And to use that language is just, I almost want to say it's just sickening. Just imagine if you're Ukrainian, put yourself in the Ukraine people for a minute. They hear that their president is telling the United States president that the victory plan is preserving trillions of dollars for his pockets. I mean, what kind of nonsense is that? How is that going to make you feel that the leader of your country is telling the world that your objective and what your definition of victory is nothing about the Ukrainian people, but about protecting the trillions of dollars for Western advancement? I mean, I'm going to be interested to see. This was just yesterday that he made those comments. I'm going to be interested in see how that kind of reaction, because I can't imagine that that's going to go over very well. But this just kind of delusion shows you categorically, authoritatively, whatever strong words you want to use, Zelensky is not interested in taking care of his people. He had so many opportunities to do that, and he has one staring him grand in the face right now. All he has to do is have a negotiated settlement on the best terms available. Just say, yes, that our interest and our focus is on protecting the people of Ukraine, and we'll do whatever it takes to preserve the rest of the life and a future forward. And then do the best you can to get any kind of deals, what limited leverage your side has. There are some leverage points because Putin does desire a negotiated settlement. More on that in a minute. But it's not going to be good. It's not going to be pretty. But to continue on with this fiction is to set yourself up for even worse disaster. And understand this, it can get worse than it is right now. And if this kind of behavior continues on, it will. Now, ironically, just about 1 hour ago from the time we're making this video, Zelensky released another video, and this time he addressed the growing threat from the Russian side.
Зараз ми знаємо, наша розвідка нам доповідає, що росіяни створюють нові дивізії, нові військові виробництва розвивають. Очевидно, буде і надалі розширюватись їхня співпраця з Північною Кореєю. На жаль, сучасні технології війни Москва розповсюджує ще у той регіон, зокрема, дронові технології. І це означає просту річ. Путін готується зовсім не до перемовин, не до настання миру, а до продовження війни. І не тільки проти нас, проти України. Вони зараз збільшують свою армію ще на більш ніж 100 тисяч солдатів. Всі партнери повинні про це знати і повинні це бачити.
Okay, now I kind of agree with him on that last phrase there. The Western people need to understand this, and they need to see it, because Vladimir Putin is doing everything he can to signal at every level that they have an interest in negotiations. They've done it through Lavrov. They've done it through Putin. They've done it through Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. Everybody is saying we're willing to talk with no preconditions, anything else. We'll talk. Putin has said he is eager to talk with President Trump. He said so on multiple occasions. He is willing to have a negotiated settlement in the war by discussions instead of at the point of the spear. But he is concurrently signaling that I am building up my force. We've been talking about this for a long time. Now you hear Zelensky himself confirming what we've been telling you, that the Russian army is growing. It's getting larger. Then there have been previously reports that up to 150,000 Russians had been massing at various points along the eastern side of the line of contact around the Pokrovsk area. There have been Russian media reports, certainly others on Telegram, have been saying that if negotiations don't succeed, then there could be a huge flood of a Russian assault. And the lines are so thin right now, and they're so brittle. If the Russians were to do that, and listen, I understand this. Since the initial invasion in 2022, and I think one or two other aborted attempts in the summer of 2022, Russia has not attempted any kind of large-scale offensive operations. Everything has been small-scale, individuals, squads, platoons, a couple of times company. I've not even seen a whole battalion operating in large numbers at any point. Everything they have accomplished, all these advances they've been making to the West, have been about incremental movement forward, because that limits the number of Russian soldiers on the contact. These mythical meat waves that have always been ascribed to Russia just don't happen. They never have. It's always been a fiction perpetrated by the West to make Russia look bad. But when you look at the actual way the Russians are contacting, it's actually in small units. If they were to suddenly bring in a large-scale organization, battalions, brigades, or divisions, as Zelensky is implying here, I doubt very seriously that the Ukraine side could withstand that. If the Russians were to push on a concentrated area of the front line, there's almost no chance that Ukraine would be able to prevent a breakthrough. And I'll tell you why. Unlike when the Ukraine side tried to make an offensive into the Russian defensive line, they had multiple belts of defenses. They had millions of mines, etc. Well, we know for sure that the Ukraine side doesn't have multiple defensive belts. They don't have enough personnel. We've talked about that at length. And they don't have millions of mines. So if all of a sudden, and the mentality of war and the pace of things creates what they call a battle rhythm, you kind of understand what it is. So the Ukraine side has gotten accustomed to the formations hitting at this small scale pace, and they're slowly taking the hits, and then they're moving back and then moving back, etc. But they're used to it. They can deal with that. If you suddenly hit those people with a massive onslaught, their mentality is not prepared to deal with that. They don't have the mental agility to just say, okay, well, this is a big one. Now we respond to this, as some of the things that they do now, small scale counterattacks, etc. They would not be prepared for it because they haven't given any thought to it, because they've never seen it. And if Russia does what Zelensky says they're preparing for, the chances militarily of Ukraine holding are pretty low, meaning Russia could literally break through. So when you're talking about having a negotiated settlement, what Putin wants, let me show you what Putin wants. This is the map here. This is the Pokrovsk area we keep talking so much about. And this is where earlier Ukrainian reports, intelligence has said that in this area back here, and of course the Russians are smart about this. It's not like, there's a grouping of 100,000 people in this small area right here, because that's suicide. Because in today's modern warfare, even for the Ukraine side, they have the ability to look deep with reconnaissance drones and to strike deep with long-range attack drones, whether big ones or dropping grenades, etc. So they would know if there was anybody here, and they would be a big targets. But what it appears is that they are spread out throughout all of these regions here in relatively small numbers to limit the risk. But in the event that they decide to attack it, and let's just say that they have calculated that this flank here south of Pokrovsk is the weakest point here, they could give an order, and within 36 to 48 hours, these troops could all simultaneously from all their different locations start moving into mass upon this one area. And you see that the Ukraine side just doesn't have the number of troops. With these blue icons are the Ukraine troops. They don't have enough to match up against that, and they couldn't move them quickly enough, because if they started moving from other portions of the front to try and meet this assault, then they would be vulnerable to hit from all the other Russians in the forward areas here. And no doubt that if this was the case, and this is purely hypothetical, I haven't even heard any rumors of this, but I'm just telling you militarily how such an operation would work. You would have all the Russian forces here to continue to have small-scale attacks to pin down the Ukraine side here. And if they started moving, the Russians also have reconnaissance drones, and they would be able to see that. And then they would strike assets in depth of here in the back area. They would be hitting them so that they would attrit them even further, meaning that at whatever Russia chose to be the point of penetration, it would be their weakest point. And once they break through, I mean, you can see, folks, there's just almost nothing back here. This actually would be a big vulnerability, because there's almost nothing behind it. Instead of trying to go into the teeth of these fortifications or these right here, this is a huge vulnerability. I mean, just look at this right here. There's fortifications here, but almost none in this area right here, all into the rear here. And then you can go straight to the Dnieper River, and there's literally nothing that can stop. This is a huge vulnerability. But when it comes to Putin and what his forces are doing, what I think he's signaling, and what I certainly hope the Trump team gets, because it doesn't look like Zelensky's going to be able to get this, is the June 16 lines, which continue to be repeated by Russian personnel, is the administrative borders of the 4 regions. So these red areas where Russia possesses, and most of it is the 4 regions, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Luhansk and Donetsk, but the administrative borders are these right here, which means that Ukraine controls them. So to have a negotiated settlement, all of these Ukrainian units in the blue you see here would have to withdraw and to move back across their side of the line. And then this would become the new division line between the two, and Russia would have this. And of course, that unleashes a whole set of difficulties about about the civilian populations living in here. They would have to withdraw, et cetera. It'll be ugly. There's no way to put a pretty face on this one. But here's the thing. By what Zelensky has just admitted there, we're talking 100,000 in addition to what's already going on along the front line here. If Zelensky and Trump are not willing to negotiate away the administrative borders here, then Russia is just going to continue to fight. They're going to continue to move forward until one of the days that they will make a breakthrough. That it's just inevitable. Just the laws of warfare don't allow Ukraine to continue fighting and to think that they're going to get rid of that and that they're going to move past it. That's the reality. That's the truth. I'm telling you the truth. It's hard, it's ugly, but it's true. Zelensky is not dealing with the truth. And listen, it doesn't matter. He can come in and promise Trump $1 trillion all day long, but he doesn't have the capacity to give it to him. I mean, just for the first point, most of it is actually already under Russian control. A vast majority, the percentage-wise, of all these theoretical trillions, and by the way, there is a huge issue of even being able to extract them and actually make it economically viable. It'd be multiple years, probably closer to a decade, to actually get anything at scale that's going to make that, financially beneficial. But even that theoretical part is mostly under Russian control right now. And if Trump wanted them, he can't just go. Putin's not going to negotiate those away and just say, yeah, sure, you can take those. He's got his eyes on what he's desiring there. And if he doesn't get it, Russia has the capacity to ignore anything that Trump says, anything that Zelensky says, and to move forward. That's just the reality of it. But there are other people that don't get reality too. And unfortunately, this is kind of a common theme we keep talking about here. And I keep hoping that at one point that people are just going to wake up, that maybe what some of these other Western leaders are saying is just hyperbole. It's just, we're putting on happy talk, but behind the scenes, we really know what's going on. And pretty soon they're going to say, okay, yeah, that's done. We're not going to do that. Unfortunately, the opposite seems to be occurring. There is a new move in the UK that they're saying, hey, you know what? We're gonna take over for the United States, because Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin under the Biden administration had run, I think it was 50 total meetings of the Ramstein group, where there was 50 nations that gathered at the Ramstein Air Base, in Germany, the United States Air Base there. And they always met every month or so, and they said, all right, what are we going to give Ukraine this time? Whatever. Well, with the demise of the Biden administration and all the things that went with that, then it was just left. That was like ended. Well, UK says, hey, we'll restart that. We're going to have another meeting. And I think it's coming this coming week, where they said, we're going to have a new meeting of that. And the UK foreign secretary, I think is the Minister of Defense, Lammy, had this to say in a surprise visit to Ukraine just yesterday.
I look forward to discussing in detail some of the ways in which we can continue to help you bilaterally, but also how we can help you multilaterally at this critical moment as we head towards a meeting in Paris of the European family particularly, and as we head towards Munich, and in the conversation that I have with the new US administration as well. But you know that the United Kingdom continues to be your foremost partner. We continue to work alongside you. It's still our assessment that Putin shows no desire to negotiate at all at this point in time. So we continue to support you to the max.
Foreign Secretary David Lammy. Yes, we see no evidence that Russia wants to negotiate. If he would watch our channel, though, he might know that that's everything that the Russians are saying. What the truth is, he sees no evidence that Putin is willing to give us whatever we ask for. Okay, there's some truth to that. But you just show, I'm talking about how delusional Volodymyr Zelensky is, and how counter to the benefit of his people. Can anything different be said of the British Foreign Secretary? I mean, he's totally detached from reality. What do you mean you don't see any evidence that Russia's willing to talk? How many interviews do we have to show of Putin standing up there saying, I'm ready to talk. I'm ready to talk. Sergei Lavrov, I'm ready to talk. We'll discuss anything. No negotiation requirements, but ahead of time. No preconditions. We're ready to talk. And then you want to say, no evidence. That's our assessment. You know, unfortunately, I believe him. I think that is his estimate, that he thinks, no, it's not going to happen. And you just had Zelensky there tell you very clearly that Russia is preparing greater combat power. This is not done in secret, and this is intended as a signal. Understand this. Putin is saying, listen, folks, we're willing to negotiate to get these minimum numbers, the June 5th, June 14th lines I keep talking a lot about, which is what I showed you on that map just a second ago. He's willing to negotiate that. If he can get it by negotiations, he'll have it. It is in his benefit. That is one of the leverage points that is the Trump side has, because Putin genuinely does want to end the war. He's not some, raging war maniac like he's characterized so many times. He's very clear on this point, and he's being clear now. But he's also being clear that he's saying, but if negotiations don't work, if we don't get our minimum requirements here, we'll take our minimum requirements. And listen, I'm just telling you, from a military point of view, there is no chance, none, that Putin could, from the position where he's at today, make an offer that will negotiate to these administrative borders. And if you refuse to do that and force him to take them by force, which means shedding more Russian blood in the process, that he will just stop at the administrative borders. He definitely won't. He'll continue on until, and militarily speaking, from now a strategic point of view, Putin will do whatever it takes to secure his western border. And what that will mean is go into the best militarily defensible line, from which it would be very difficult for any foreign military to make an incursion into what would then be his territory, and that's the Dnieper River. In my view, if these negotiations don't work now, there is the almost certainty that the next objective that Putin will give his military is the Dnieper River, not just the administrative borders. If these negotiations don't satisfy the Russian side and they don't end in an end of the war, then he's just going to go. And I think the next objective at the strategic level will be the Dnieper River and everything in between there. And if you look at the map, you'll see that the city of Kiev is on the Dnieper River. So the question would be, how far would Ukraine go? We showed you a Ukrainian soldier last week at one of his trials because he had been deserted. He warned, that trooper warned right then, that if we don't end this war, then the number of Ukraine troops is going to run out, and they're going to be putting in lawyers and judges to be fighting on the front lines, and that's not going to stop. And then they're going to be, he said, quote, at the gates of Kiev. That's what he said. And he's right. And there is an ever real possibility with that. And we know that for sure because the Ukraine side, look, they've been bleeding out troops. It was reporting the Wall Street Journal early this week, I think it was, that it talked about that. That's the one right there. It said, Russian men against Ukrainian machines on the battlefield line. The subhead, if you can read that there, it says, desperately short of infantry. Kiev is using aerial drones to try and pick off Russian infantry. It's slowing, but not stopping the Russian advance. And again, folks, that's the small scale operations at the squad, platoon, and sometimes company level of Russia. This is not the big stuff. These drones that the Ukraine side has, and they're not insignificant, they can slow and they can inflict a damage on Russia. But at some point, the Russians will have to calculate, do these small scale incursions actually protect our number of casualties, limit the number of casualties? Because an argument can be made, and I suspect that this debate is going on within the Russian high command. Would it not be a more casualty saving operations to have a big fist operation, to have a brigade or maybe even multi-brigade or division level attack to break through and just puncture it and then be able to just drive all the way to the Dnieper River? Now, that's happened in history. I think I've told you a few times, 1940 in France, the French-British Army had all these Maginot Line fortifications. They were trying to prevent any kind of a big incursion into their country, and they thought they had everything they needed. But the Germans made one penetration around the area of Sedan in the Ardennes forest, and they broke through with military forces. Once they broke through the line, then they had operational reserves, and they literally drove across France, just drove because there was no more fortifications, no more concentrations of troops. They didn't have multiple lines, etc. That situation is lining up right now because it actually exists, that the threat and the danger exists for the Ukraine side. And it continuing to just have fantasies about somehow trillions of dollars of capabilities that are theoretical and that are buried in some cases miles literally under the ground is not going to stop that. It's not going to change what's happening on the ground. And that's the truth of it here. But that's not stopping the Western people from thinking a lot of this stuff. You also have not just Ukraine, not just France, but the French and the Dutch have said, hey, you know what? How about at this late hour, we give you a bunch of Mirage fighters? And so they have done that as well. And we showed you yesterday, Sean Bell, a British expert who was a fighter pilot himself, say, hey, look, it's going to take years to train up pilots to do these kind of things. And they don't have the systems to operate them, the maintenance, the integrated air defense capacity, et cetera. So he says, I don't even know what these are going to do. And Sean Bell is quite pro-Ukraine. So for him to say that out loud is telling. But again, it just shows you the level of just disconnection. Why would these countries give their physical platforms that cost millions of dollars and will now diminish their own air capacity where they do have trained pilots and they do have the infrastructure to use them, and then hand it away? All it's going to do is be destroyed. I mean, I hope that there's nobody in these countries militarily that are telling them that this could possibly have some positive impact. Maybe they're thinking, you know what it could do, though, is it could increase the price on Putin and make him have a negotiated settlement. Folks, that was a theoretical view that you could have had in 2023. That was obliterated on the battlefield, and now nobody can be under the illusion that that's possible at this late hour, especially in light of what the Wall Street Journal is reporting and what Volodymyr Zelensky himself is admitting, revealing from his own internal or his own intelligence services. And yet they do. Now then we find out that that Trump is according to news just came out yesterday, is being talked about again this morning, that he may be meeting Zelensky as early as next week. And we'll see if that ends up happening. But it could be in Washington. There's the Munich Security Conference. It's going to be happening, I believe, on the 14th and 15th of February next week. But before that, Zelensky may come to Trump. And, you know, one of the things they're going to try to do is figure out what the plan forward is. Now, here's where I hope that the Trump administration is going to be taking a hard line. Because right now, if the Trump administration cares about getting this war over, if the Trump administration cares about the Ukrainian people, and if the Trump administration cares about having any theoretical hope for having access to some of those trillions of dollars, then he needs to have a hard decision or a hard position on Zelensky. Yeah, my view is he needs to tell him in no uncertain terms, this war will come to an end in 100 days that I have set, whatever that actual date is. I think it's April something. And you will either be on board with it, or we're going to take our money and we're going to go home and we're not going to do anymore. Now, there is some leverage for Trump to do that. You may have seen in the news this morning that the Trump administration is putting forth a nearly $7 billion aid package, a military package for Israel, not for Ukraine, for Israel. Most of the Ukrainian aid has been frozen. Some of it has been released apparently in the last week or so, but that's only the stuff that Biden had authorized before that and had already released. They're just saying the flow is going to continue on. Trump hasn't even talked about a new aid package. So once that runs out, once whatever's in the pipeline is delivered, there's no even talk about anything else. And so Trump has just shown for an ally that he thinks can do something militarily, and we'll talk another time on what that is supposed to mean for the Israeli, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, et cetera situation. That's a separate issue that deserves its own show. But for the purpose of this discussion here, that just shows you that Trump, when he thinks that there's some military utility to gain, he's putting large, huge numbers of dollars. Just understand, the normal amount of money that we would send to Israel every year was $3.8 billion prior to this war. And Biden, I think, last I numbered, this could be wrong, but it's maybe somewhere around $15 billion on top of that he had given during the latter part of his administration. And now here's this double what we would ordinarily give in one fell swoop. And there's no evidence that that's going to be the last one. But then for Ukraine, nada. I don't see anything. I don't even see any reports that Trump is thinking about it. So if that's the case, and if Trump is not even making any plans to give them any additional money, then I think privately he needs to tell him, Volodymyr, this deal's done. We're over. Either you agree to the ceasefire that I'm trying to negotiate, and you agree to the territorial concessions that are necessary to end this war, i.e. the administrative borders, or you're going to be on your own, and we're going to pull out, and we're going to end our deal, and we're not going to give you any more money. Now, that's a hard position, and it would take an enormous amount of leadership on Trump's position to do so, because he would come under withering pressure from his own party, some members like the Senator McConnell, Mitch McConnell, definitely from the other party, and obviously from other members of the European Union. A lot of them, probably the UK, would be very much against that. But that's the best thing that Trump can do if he actually wants to save the Ukrainian people, because the alternative, hear me, if you don't make such a deal, then you are almost handing over to Vladimir Putin everything in Ukraine up to the Dnieper River, even if it takes another half a year, 6 months, 9 months, even a year, even if it took another year. Russia has the capacity, the resources, and the willpower to do it, and there is nothing the Ukraine side can do. And honestly, if Trump would have to, have a similar size package, actually much more than 7, it would probably have to be 50, 75, $100 billion that he would have to allocate to enable Ukraine to even fight another 6 to 9 months. That's assuming that the manpower in Ukraine can do it, and I think the odds are very, very low that they can. Gary has shown you many clips that we've shown in recent past of the Ukraine men themselves going in front and telling you, we can't do this, we need help, or we're not going to make it. You have Budanov, allegedly, the intel services general in Ukraine, allegedly publicly said that they could hang out maybe 6 more months. That's coming from Budanov. He has since tried to distance himself from it, but he hasn't repudiated it. And I can tell you that I don't have any such constraints. And I can just tell you militarily, I don't even know they can make 6 months, but I don't see how they could go much beyond that, especially with the fragility of what the Ukrainian troops are now, and the clear evidence that the Trump administration wants to end the war by April. I mean, that's just the bottom lines. And just imagine the Ukraine troops, what's left of their. Do you really want to fight and die for something that is about to be over? So if the line is here or the line is here, do you care? There's going to be a line. The war will be over. Trump is not going to continue it on. Then what is there to die for? Why should you sacrifice your life? You can understand that to be a conversation that's going to be going on in every head on the Ukraine side. And if they start talking amongst themselves, we've already been seeing larger scale withdrawals and large scale desertions, et cetera. I mean, there could be a flood at some point where enough guys could just say, that's it. If they come to the conclusion themselves that Zelensky doesn't have their back, that he doesn't care about them, and these comments today or yesterday are certainly going to go a long way to feeding that fear, they could literally see just a collapse, not even the Russian military breakthrough with the division, but just that the line itself collapses. That's not an outlandish possibility. There are some real possibilities of that. But we'll see what's going to happen with that soon. I mean, we'll certainly stay on top of all this for you. And there's a lot of things that are probably going to happen next week with the Munich Security Conference, whether Zelensky, if he does come to the White House, you can be sure that we'll be all over that. We'll be on top of that situation here and bringing you expert commentary as it happens. So that's it for today. We appreciate you guys joining us. And as always, like and subscribe if you haven't. And also, just as a reminder, we're on podcast. And I know some of you are traveling or you just like to get your information via podcast. Just go anywhere you have podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict. Just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You got to type that whole phrase in there and you'll find us waiting for you there. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys very much. And we will look forward to seeing you next week on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.